Hello, everyone who's joining. Welcome to the February Collaborative Mentoring webinar series. Thanks all for joining. We're going to give it a few more minutes just so that we can get as many people in here as possible. But in the meantime, we would love to know where you are located. So feel free to drop your name and where you're located in the chat. We were just talking about the weather at all of our respective locations, and it's all over the board. So I hope everybody's staying warm, staying dry, being able to get outside. Oh, we already got some. We got Colorado, Minnesota, Idaho. Awesome. Wow, we have people from all over the place. Wyoming, Michigan, Tennessee, North Carolina, Kansas. Again, as folks are joining, welcome to the February CMWS. Feel free to drop your name and where you're located in the chat so we can get to know each other a little bit. We'll have a couple other questions to get to know you all, but continue throughout the entire time to chat amongst yourselves, ask each other questions, and share resources. New home of the Bears, love it. Minnesota, Washington. Hello, everyone who's just joining us. We're going to give it a couple more minutes just for more folks to enter, but welcome to the February CMWS Leveraging Assets to Address Resource Gaps in Rural Mentoring. We have an amazing panel and presentation for you all today, so very excited to get started in just another minute or two. All right, so I think we will get started. So again, for anybody who just joined, welcome to the February CMWS Collaborative Mentoring webinar series, Leveraging Assets to Address Resource Gaps in Rural Mentoring. You can go on to the next slide, Josh. Awesome. So just for some guidelines and structure around today's conversation, all attendees have been muted for the best possible sound, but we still do want to hear any questions, any thoughts, any ideas that you all have. So please feel free to type questions in the Q&A panel, which is located at the bottom of your screen with a little Q&A button. Type any comments that you have in the chat box. Feel free and make sure to show a lot of love to our panelists today throughout. Put any ideas that you have, any things that have worked for you as well in that chat box. Live captions are available on the panel by clicking on the CC button, live transcript at the bottom of the screen. We have a couple polls for you all today, but first make sure to introduce yourself in the chat, name, where you're located, anything else you'd like to share. And yeah, continue to use the chat. You can move on to the next slide. So just as a couple reminders, all of the resources will be available via email on the website to the PDF of the presentation slides. alongside the recording and any resources that we all mentioned today. And then we also do have a survey that will be coming at the end of the webinar. So please make sure to fill that out before you leave. We do really take that feedback into consideration and into heart. So we want to make sure that we're doing the best possible job that we can. You can go on to the next slide. Awesome. So today's webinar will be focused on leveraging assets to address resource gaps in mentoring. So just a little bit of an overview of what this discussion will be kind of focusing on. 18% of children, 13.4 million, live in rural communities within the US, while only 10% of US mentoring programs are in those same communities. Large geographic service areas, scarce resources, and limited opportunities all contribute to the challenges of building and maintaining mentoring infrastructure. We've booked a panel of professionals who have leveraged their assets in their community to build thriving rural mentoring programs. And we'll get to learn the creative strategies that they've implemented and innovative partnerships that they've built that you can model within your own organization. And before we move on, I did remember that I do want to send out the polls. Looks like we have over 100 folks in the room today. That's super exciting. So the first poll will be based on your experience level. And so I'm launching that now. You should see it pop up on your screen. So feel free to answer what you would consider yourself to be in regards to the mentoring field: a beginner, experienced, expert, maybe a little bit of all three. I know some days I feel like a beginner, some days I never feel like an expert, but some days I feel experienced at the very least. So give it a couple more seconds. And we will end that poll here. It looks like we have a pretty good spread out of beginners, experienced, and experts. So again, whatever level you are, we want to hear from you. So feel free to contribute your ideas and your thoughts. All perspectives are valued. The next poll will be around the role in the mentoring field that you hold. So that one will be coming up on your screen in just a second. So for this one, just choose which describes your role in the mentoring field. I know sometimes it can be a variety of roles. We all kind of take on so many different roles in our lives, both professional and personal. So just pick the best one. So we'll close it out in just another 2 seconds. Cool. So again, we have folks from all sorts of backgrounds. It looks like the majority of us are mentoring program staff and practitioners. And then finally, we have one last poll that's kind of specific to today's conversation. And that's going to be asking which type of community would you consider yourself or your program participants to be located. And this one's a multiple choice. So if multiple apply, feel free to check off multiple boxes. We're hopefully going to be able to use this information to inform the conversation we have today and inform some of the answers that our panelists have. So. Awesome. So it looks like we actually have a majority of folks coming from rural areas, which is really exciting. Perfectly tailored to this conversation. I don't know how this poll thing is calculating, but the math doesn't seem to be adding up. But it looks like we have about 75% of folks coming from rural backgrounds. So that's really exciting. And we'll end that poll. Awesome. Thank you all for participating in those polls. We can move on to the next slide. So for some brief introductions of our facilitator and then our panelists, first we have Joshua Long as our facilitator. Joshua empowers youth-serving organizations by building partnerships and identifying resources to strengthen programming. Josh's innovation, ability to build strong connections, and demonstrated commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion at IYI are at the core of his work managing the educational content of all IYI's professional education initiatives. Prior to IYI, he worked in education, developing college access curriculum and support for high school seniors. Joshua is also passionate about youth sports, currently serving as a head swim coach. Next, we have Jane Rogan. Jane Rogan leads the Sustaining Hoosier Communities Initiative, connecting communities to IU courses, students, and faculty to address community-identified needs and opportunities. A Hoosier by choice, Jane grew up in Cheshire, a rural area of the United Kingdom known for its dairy production and silk weaving arts. Prior to joining the center, Jane worked for the IU Kelley School of Business and the Liberal Arts Management Program in the Office of the Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education. And last but not least, we have Ashley Doolittle. A lifelong enthusiast of most everything, Ashley's insatiable curiosity has led her to discover the joys of pickling, scavenger hunts, the ukulele, meditation, folk music, and flying trapeze, to name a few. Very cool. In her more tranquil moments, Ashley loves nothing more than curling up with a book, science fiction, a giant mug of tea, jasmine, and some chocolate, as dark as she can find. Now that she and her family have moved to the Upper Valley, Ashley is looking forward to expanding her extracurricular repertoire to include snowshoeing, sugaring, and finding new and delicious ways to appreciate the bounty of her blueberry bushes. And so with that, I believe I am passing it on over to Josh.
Yes, thank you, Jake. Ashley, at some point, I want to know what sugaring is, just so we're putting that out into the world. It sounds amazing, but I would like to know what it is. Welcome. Thank you, Jake. Thank you, everyone, for being here. My name is Joshua Long. Again, I'm the Senior Educational Content Manager at the Indiana Youth Institute. Mentoring is a huge part of what we do, and rural mentoring provides some great opportunities and some great challenges. And so I'm excited to have our two panelists today. I'm going to start. Each of the panelists is going to go through some slides to sort of talk about their work. And so we're going to start with Jane. Jane, if you can tell us a little bit about what you do with Indiana University, what your experience in this space has been like. And then I think you have a couple slides that kind of help define the word rule and some of the data around it. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Joshua. I appreciate it. Hi, everybody. It's so strange to be in front of you all and not be able to see you, but that is what webinars are all about. So yes, I work for the Indiana University Center for Rural Engagement. We have been on the map for approximately 5 years now. We were the grateful recipients of a large donation from the Indiana Lilly Foundation, which got our center up and running. Our approach in the center is really what it says on this slide, which is to help Indiana thrive. That's the whole context of everything that we do. We work primarily with Southwest Central Indiana. If you know anything about Indiana, Indianapolis is kind of slap bang in the middle. And then Bloomington is the main campus for Indiana University, and that's about an hour south of Indianapolis. And our territory is basically from the Bloomington campus and on down south to the river, but staying sort of in the central part of Indiana. So we don't go over to Louisville and we don't go over to Evansville, and we sort of stay right in the middle, but everywhere from the campus on down south. And the main work that we do is really all related to all kinds of sustainability. So human sustainability, social sustainability, economic sustainability is a big part of that, really looking after the resources that we have within our rural areas. So really thinking about stewardship of our agricultural, recreational areas as well. So those are sort of the main parts of what we do. And when we started up our center, we are not a land grant institution. So those of you who are familiar with our land grants, you probably are most familiar with our extension agents who are out in every county in the states where they operate, so pretty much all of the states. We are not a land grant institution. Purdue, as Joshua well knows, is our land grant institution. And so we partner very, very closely with the extension agents who are out and about in communities, but we also have our own staff who go out and do a lot of outreach. But our areas and our paths, they cross, but our lanes are slightly different in how we approach the work that we do. So I wanted to talk a little bit about rural. I'm so glad that folks are on this call representing rural areas. Sometimes I have to go deep on what is rural, but it seems like with this crowd, we might just be able to skim the surface. But rural is as rural does, to be quite honest. There are so many different definitions of what rural means, and you can get into the government's own definitions. And I think there are maybe 7 different definitions of how the government at a federal level will classify what counts as rural. But one of the books that I read early on that said it best is, if you think you're rural, you're probably rural. So it almost in terms of self-identification, if you understand that what is around you looks rural, then most likely you are rural. There's a great website if you want to check it out. It's called How Rural Am I? If you just type that into Google, it'll come up. And this will give you a percentage based on your zip code. It'll give you a percentage of rurality. So in that zip code area, it'll tell you what percentage of the zip code is considered rural. So that can also sometimes be a good indicator. But there are really big sort of symbols and signs out there for you to really understand whether or not you're rural. And some of those are basically the things that you would imagine, or that we hope you would imagine. Distance between resources is obvious, and between geographic centers is obviously a huge part of that. Obviously along with that come difficulties of transportation, and then obviously the effects of isolation, and they can be profound, not just on children, but also on seniors. And so being in a rural location, you know, all of those things that we think about of idyllic settings, and that's all true, but that comes at a price. And some of those prices are differential access to all kinds of things, whether that's to food. And the irony is, of course, when we're talking about rural, we're talking about oftentimes lots of geographies that produce agricultural resources, but they are not necessarily consumed locally. When we're talking about crop production, particularly in large Midwestern states, those crops are commodity crops. They're not staying in the local area, they're being shipped out, they're being exported. And then food that is grown is ironically known as a specialty crop, and people do not tend to grow specialty crops in local areas, and if they do, they grow very small scale. So with that, we have obviously lots of emphasis on primary industry, agriculture, coal, and so forth. When we see secondary industries, things like manufacturing, tends to be small scale, doesn't tend to be particularly large plants, and that's a function of transportation. Tertiary industry service providers, obviously, and we're all going to need grocery stores, we're going to need big box stores. But again, the industries tend to be kind of you know, spread out. Those industries spread out. And then what we would consider the knowledge sector. The knowledge sector is pretty much non-existent, and if it's there, it's very small in our rural areas. Oftentimes we'll see a public sector that's under-resourced, so you might not see the level of positions that you may see in local government within a small town. You might not see as many of those positions, and that means there are fewer people around who are tasked with carrying the burden. And we see then a lot more grassroots volunteerism to really carry the load and get things done in communities. Water quality and safety is a concern, and we all know that the impacts of climate change are felt on a daily basis. We were just joking, it's not maybe not the right word, we're talking about the fact that yesterday where I live, it was 68 and I ate my lunch outside in a t-shirt. Today it's in the 50s, and tonight it'll be in the 20s. So, you know, we're seeing very changeable situations, which means that farmers are planting crops earlier. They're also having to replant crops after unprecedented floods. And so there's a real impact on the climate with the success of communities. We have still not seen rural communities regain their footing after the 2008 recession. We saw a lot of small and medium-sized businesses close during that recession and then not come back again. And that means we're seeing sort of an exodus out of the communities. And then broadband and self-service is something that thankfully the current administration is really putting a lot of effort into, because what we see with the lack of broadband service and a lack of cell service is we see that kids are falling further and further behind their urban peers. You know, if it's a snow day and they get sent home, they're not necessarily able to log in and do their work, because even though they're home, they might not have access to be able to keep up with the work that they're doing. Josh, you want to move this along? So I just want to give you a kind of a map here of what we believe, what we know is true in the U.S. Rather than what we believe is true. And we can see here rurality and urban zones and suburban and small metro zones being put on this map. This is part of the census data. And I think what you ought to take from that is that there are large swaths of this country that are far away from any kind of urban center. And these folks are, another piece of this is that rural in Indiana looks nothing like rural in Arizona. Rural in Arizona looks nothing like rural in Alaska. I have some colleagues up in Alaska who literally take dog sleds out to certain parts of the state that they cover. So, just know that rural is a big deal, and it's a big amount of land that is covered. And it's often easy to think, well, there's not that many people there. There are still people there, and they still require our services and our assistance. Josh, want to move us? Thanks. So one of the things that we can see that are sort of typical for rural communities is that rural communities tend to age. They tend to skew towards the aging population. And you can see that with these charts here, that the sort of middle ground of population, you can see the 35 to 64-year-old age bracket is pretty much consistent, urban, suburban, rural. But then you look at the 65 plus, you'll see that the rural, you'll see the skew towards an older population in the rural areas. And then you'll see a slight skew with fewer younger people in the 0 to sort of mid 30s. A lot of that is about people leaving to go seek different opportunities, whether that's going for education or going for different kinds of job opportunities. But we're not seeing. I know there was a lot of talk during COVID when we were all cooped up at home, and people were like, "Why am I living here? Why I could go live anywhere?" But the realities of distance and maybe lack of access to broadband or different kinds of services are keeping people pretty much rooted. There was the nice sort of apocryphal stories of everybody going to move back home and go live in rural wherever, and we didn't really see much of that happening. Partly because there's also a big pressure on housing, and there was not really a lot of opportunities for people for where they're going to move to. Josh, want to go on? So I wanted to show you, this is the state of Indiana. I wanted just to give you a couple of examples. I'm a bit of a data nerd. I think that data tells a really good picture. It really paints a good picture. So here we have Allen, Lawrence, Washington, and Marion counties. Allen County is the home of Fort Wayne, Indiana's second largest city. Marion County is the home of Indianapolis, obviously the largest city in Indiana. Lawrence County is the county due south from me. And Washington County is a county in the southeast of the state. And I wanted to show you this as if you really don't know what's going on in your communities and you just pull data, you can learn a lot from what you're seeing just in data like this. So for example, if you look at Allen County, the town of Fort Wayne, the city of Fort Wayne occupies 71.3% of the county's residents live there. You look at Indianapolis, and you go through all those different towns that are within the Marion County area, but you look at Indianapolis itself, 90.9% of the population lives in that one area. Now move on to places like Lawrence County and Washington that are very rural. The town of Bedford is the largest town in in Lawrence County, but it's only 29.1% of its residents who live within that area. And then again, you can look at Washington County. Salem is the largest town. 22.1% of its residents live there. So you can see that the residents that you're serving within a local, what we call a micropolitan area, it's a large number compared to the size of the county, but it's a very small percentage of the county by comparison, which means you're going to have to do a lot more traveling to go reach those students and reach the youth. This is an interesting one because here we have two different counties where the high school graduation rate is pretty much the same. 86.1% of the county gets a high school degree. That ranks 73rd in the state. And the other one, 85%, that ranks 80th in the state out of 92 counties. But then look at the difference with who goes on to get a bachelor's degree. 30.9% of the first county go on, that ranks 8th in the state. And the other county is 13.4%, which ranks 75th. Why is this important? Because you can look at that and you could maybe make some assumptions. And if you want to hit the button, Josh, we'll fill in the blanks here. So Marion County, which is primarily an urban county, it's the city of Indianapolis, you have far more people going on to get a college degree in that area, and you have far fewer people in rural communities who are thinking about going on to get higher education. So this becomes a critical entry point for a program like mine to think about how we can move the needle on that in our rural communities. So I'll just quickly go through this, what you can see between Washington County, which is a typical rural community, and Marion County, typical urban community. When you see this rural-urban divide, you're going to see income levels skew much lower in rural communities. You're going to see poverty rates being relatively equal amongst both communities. You're going to see the percentage of food recipients by state, obviously a lot lower in the rural communities, but there are still a lot of folks who really require food assistance, free lunches, that kind of thing. I think it's easy for us to imagine that rural communities, everybody's looking out for one another, and somebody's going to help you. It's not always the case, right? So we do see some similarities, but on average, we can see median income skewing a lot lower in our rural communities. In terms of race and ethnicity, most parts of rural Indiana are incredibly monolithically white. We are seeing an increase in Hispanic populations in certain pockets of our state, but it's not all over the state. And those increases in population with our Latinx, the growth in our Latinx population is coming from very specific job opportunities, a lot of them to do with meat and meat processing around the state. So a sort of byproduct of our agricultural heritage.
That's great. Thank you for that, Jane. We're going to move on to Ashley, and she's going to give an introduction. But I did notice a question in the chat, and I think we're going to save some of these questions until the end. But keep them coming in; they're really great. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ashley, and she is going to talk about her role, a little bit about Dartmouth, and what they all do. So, Ashley.
Awesome. Thank you. I saw someone is from Arlington Heights, and that is where I grew up. So shout out to Recreation Park in Belmont, because that was my street. I also do more than my extracurriculars. So if you have an interest in my academic background, there's that too. And sugaring has to do with maple syrup sugaring. So anyway, with that preamble, yes, I'm going to talk about our Center for Social Impact. And you can thank you. So our mission is to basically use community-based experiential learning as a vehicle for students. And so this is how we do it. And I'm going to talk about one branch of our center, which is our youth education and mentoring programs. We are in a rural area of New England, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Go ahead. Thank you. So when we talk with students, I actually use some of these slides when I'm training students too. We talk about it on this kind of pendulum of what are students gaining and what are we offering to community partners. And so students, when they're doing experiential learning in the community for mentoring or for any of our programs, here's some of the things that they're learning, right? These are some of the outcomes that we hold ourselves accountable to at the Center for Social Impact at Dartmouth as well. So students are grappling in the gray, as I often call it, this messiness of life between a paper that they've read and real humans. They're learning about different social issues. In our case, a lot of it is educational access and rural poverty. They're working across difference, and they're developing some skills. In the case of mentoring, it's mentoring skills, and some of our other programs, it's an intersection of a few different ones together. And then thank you, Josh, what we offer to community partners are when we are building these reciprocal collaborative relationships, this is what we say will be what the partner receives. And that is humans. That's the people power. it is also the kind of creativity and ingenuity of Dartmouth students and the skills that they bring to bear, right? I mean, I came to this work through the social sector, the nonprofit sector, and there's never enough resources and there's never enough time and there's never enough staff. And so being able to leverage the local college or university for some of the pieces that can help advance their work, that is really important to the organization because it is without any kind of financial resources. And when we have scoped it correctly, is this is equitable, right? What they are receiving and what the students are receiving. This may not be balanced all the time, but it should be balanced by the end of an encounter, right? So we tell students at the beginning, they're going to be learning a lot and offering not so much. And hopefully by the end, they will be offering a lot and the community partner will get to kind of rest and receive a little bit so that that's even. This is just a little bit of all of the programs of our center and all of the different ways that we engage students and community partners in experiential learning. I'm here today to talk about the youth education and mentoring or YEM programs, but the rest are, we have some in the classroom that do kind of academic work with community partners. We have immersion trips and internships and all of those other pieces. So if you have questions about these, perhaps at the end, I'd be happy to answer those, but for the sake of time, I just wanted to give you a little bit of scope as to the work of our center, and then I'll dive more deeply into YEM programs. We have these YEM programs. So America Reads, which is a federal work study program focusing on literacy and usually kindergarten, first and second grade. We have Growing Change, which is an in-class mentoring program. Farm to School is the curriculum. So it's on a lot of growth and sustainability and growing things. That we are in a rural part of the country with lots of people who grow and have gardens. So this is a very active part of classroom learning for first, second, third, and fourth graders. SIBS is our version of Big Brothers, Big Sisters, so one-on-one mentoring. Olay is working with junior high primarily students. It's outdoor leadership experience. They are using kind of the natural world as a vehicle and as a launch pad for creating mentoring in this kind of pivotal young adult transition time. And SEED, strengthening educational access with Dartmouth. I realize that is not how you spell the word SEED, but it's an acronym. It is first gen low income high school scholars in the Upper Valley across New Hampshire and Vermont. It is not a feeder program for Dartmouth. It is finding the absolute right fit post-secondary educational institution for first gen low income students, and Dartmouth students are the mentors. So this is just kind of the swath of ages and schools that we work within. I want to give a hot second of a nod to the Upper Valley and what the heck I mean by that. So this is the Upper Valley. It's beautiful. Go ahead, Josh. Our programs are kind of across it, as you can see, and I'll dive into the map in a minute, but we work, the Upper Valley is a bi-state region. So New Hampshire and Vermont both constitute the Upper Valley. The high school locally serves students in both areas, both states, which is rather unique. And so we are very thoughtful about making sure that we are partnering with under-resourced schools on both sides of the state. We want to make sure we're also within 45 minutes to an hour from Dartmouth, because otherwise transportation becomes bananas. But outside of that small contingency, we are trying to work and support both sides of the state and both sides of the border. This is in particular what the Upper Valley looks like. And I want to draw special attention, just like Jane did, to immense socioeconomic disparities. We are, I think it's unequivocal, we are in a predominantly white, as far as racial disparities, area of the country, Dartmouth College being a tiny little bubble that doesn't look like the rest of New Hampshire and Vermont, but socioeconomically vastly diverse. We do not, as an example, so Dartmouth College is in Hanover, New Hampshire. We do not have any community partners that are in Hanover. It is a very well-resourced town. And so all of our partners are in other towns that are, as you can see from kind of the distinction between Hanover, Norwich, and Lyme, and everywhere else. The household poverty rate, the median household income, it is vast what that spread is, going from $50,000 to $55,000 to 130. Probably if I were to update this, these numbers were from, I want to say 2020, so a few years ago. So it's helpful also to tell students about this. I think every single college that I have ever been on talks about the bubble. It's just a universal thing. Everyone feels like they're in a bubble. And so we spend a lot of time talking about the fact that you don't have to get very far outside of that bubble to see a really different reality of what it looks like to live and work rurally. We also spend a lot of time with students because Dartmouth students come from all over on language. There are first year students in particular, for example, will often talk about being, quote, in the middle of nowhere. And we're like, nope, actually, the people who live here choose to do so, and it is their home. And so by talking about it as in the middle of nowhere, you are lessening where they have chosen, where they can afford, how they are living their lives. You are here for 4 years, welcome, and we will be here long after. So let's kind of begin to look at the way that our narrative shapes how students engage with community partners, such that that community begins to see them as individuals who are on the same level instead of kind of looking down from an ivory tower.
Great, thank you, Ashley. Before we move back to Jane, I have 2 follow-ups for you. The first is you mentioned community partners a few times. Can you define what community partner means for you in the context of your work?
Sure. So community partners for us, they are anyone that is not a Dartmouth affiliate. So this is schools, and it is social sector organizations primarily. And we say social sector instead of nonprofit also intentionally. They're mostly, they can be conflated. And for students, the word nonprofit, despite the fact that this is not actually what it means, it elicits a fear response of, I will never be able to make a living in that as a career. And so we have kind of changed the jargon to say it's the social sector. It is 501c3s and, quote, traditional nonprofits, and it is also B Corps and government agencies and schools and academic institutions. So that's what we mean by community partners. I use that term more broadly because the youth education and mentoring programs, our partners are schools, but for everything else, it is social sector organizations and, in climate change and healthcare and all of the different other sectors. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And then one more thing to just expand upon, but a lot of your mentors are obviously students at Dartmouth. And so you mentioned how like communication is important. And so I'm wondering about the onboarding of the students that are mentors at the continued education, and how do you approach that that type of sensitive communication that they need to change, but you obviously don't want to get them disinterested.
Yeah. Thankfully, I have an entire slide dedicated to this, so we will totally get there. I think I will walk you through when we get to that slide, like how we onboard and all of the different trainings. I think the subtext of what I'm also hearing from your question is a little bit more of a human or compassion piece. And so I think the way that I engage with students when I hear them say middle of nowhere or something like that is a gentle reminder, similar to how I just presented it to you, that, for example, I choose to live here, I'm raising my child here, that is very intentional, and that, find a way to open the door for conversation in a way that is not shaming, because it is not intended to be unkind or demeaning to the population. That's been my experience. It is simply a lack of awareness of what the impact that has, and we want to make sure that they are thoughtful about the words that they use when they're going to engage with community partners, but also not say, you're 18, you're supposed to know absolutely everything. Because
I appreciate that, and I jumped the gun a little bit. We want to make sure that we're providing folks with tools and resources, but I think one of the best tools is just reframing language to be more asset based, and what that does for self-fulfilling prophecies, especially for our mentees. And so you can talk a little bit more about that later. I was just a little bit excited about you mentioning that. Yep. One more question that just came up, I think we can address right away. Do your student mentors have to be a certain age to mentor, Ashley?
They just need to be college students, which you would think is 18, but we have some who are 16. It doesn't happen a lot, but it happens occasionally, in which case we do check their age to make sure that that is, that if we're working with different schools, we have kind of been very clear about what that looks like. I don't think I go into this in great depth, but you know, for all of our schools, you'll see this on the slide that I referenced a second ago when I get there, but every district has their own background check and fingerprinting process, because we're working with minors, even the high schoolers, right? And so and for our Big Brother, Big Sister program, which we call SIBS, because it's not affiliated with the national organization, we only mentor up until about 4th grade, because after that, the kind of closeness in age becomes a little bit more of a boundary issue that is kind of challenging. Or could be challenging, especially for one-on-one. So no, there's no age cutoff per se, but we're kind of mindful about exactly what the age is of our mentors, depending on the program and depending on the age of the young people that they will be working with.
Great, thank you. Terry and Daniel asked questions that I think will come to later. I think you have some slides on that, so I just wanted to let them know that we will get back to that. But now I'm going to go back to Jane for a couple more slides. And Jane, I want you to talk about some specific opportunities that you see in working with rural communities and community organizations that would be rural, and then talk a little bit about challenges that you all face or that they face, and then what are some ways that you are addressing these?
Great, thanks, Joshua. And Ashley, really great to hear all the work that you're doing. It's nice to see it all fleshed out a little bit, so thanks. So again, I think, you know, the typical concerns that we're seeing are lower graduation rates, definitely far lower post-secondary attendance for students. We've got obviously median income being lower, and while that might mean that attendance in college could be carried a lot, the burden of that could be carried by different kinds of scholarships and awards, that kind of thing, it still feels like it's a bridge too far for a lot of students. There's a lack of skilled workers within the state of Indiana, which means that new businesses or growing businesses often tend to look further afield rather than looking within their own backyards. And that means that the future for kids, you know, as they transition out of high school, becomes a little bit more problematic and a little bit more uncertain. We have a lot of health challenges. Let's just put that right out there, right? Where rural residents tend to see much higher rates of what we would consider lifestyle diseases than elsewhere. We have more money, more federal money and Medicare and Medicaid going to support rural communities because of chronic illnesses than going elsewhere. We have not recovered from opioid and methamphetamine issues, and the impacts are lingering and long lasting. And we also have a very, very acute shortage of health providers, mental health providers within our rural communities. We just can't get physicians, can't get nurses, and we can't get social workers. And then that issue is, like I said, it's acute. It's been chronic, but it's now acute post-COVID because opportunities are drawing people elsewhere. And we're in this strange wage bargaining war, I feel. So that then leads us into what the opportunities are, right?
There was, Jane, there was a question here that might apply, especially about the movement of people. Amy asked, with COVID and more businesses offering remote work, are we seeing an increase in younger professionals moving out of the urban suburban areas and into rural areas? And how has rural broadband access affected that?
Yeah, you would love to think that that were true. I would love to think that were true. We haven't really seen much of it, to be honest. If we've seen it, it's in pretty small numbers. I think we are seeing a lot of attention being paid to rural broadband, but it's going to take a long time. Where we're actually seeing the fastest increase in access to rural broadband is when our local rural electric corporations are now starting to lay optic fiber for broadband. So they're just taking it over like they did in the 1910s and 20s when they were electrifying the country. We're now doing the same thing with broadband access. And so it's going to take a while before we see the results of that. So the opportunities that we have for partnering with communities are really based in where the difficulties are. And that's in making sure that we're providing services around addictions and treatment and stigma reduction, finding opportunities for recreation for both residents and tourists alike, and the increase in visible activity and visible recreation activity helps all members of the community to recognize that that's a vibrant part of life. Really thinking about how we assess our food systems, that the parts of our communities that are rural should not just be the place where it's extractive, right? The agriculture is grown there and taken elsewhere, but we have an obligation to also use our land for the betterment of our own communities. And that means really thinking carefully about what we grow and how we grow it and what we do to replenish our soil and to not pollute our waterways in the process. And then again, really trying to double down on broadband's work. While we're doing all of those big picture pieces, it allows us to do lots and lots of smaller projects that include one-on-one and courses and local communities interacting with one another. So I have a few brief things I wanted to mention here. This one in particular tugs at my heartstrings. So the program that I run within the Center for Rural Engagement partners with communities and matches the issues and concerns that they have, the assets that they hold, and our faculty on campus. And my job is really playing matchmaker, is understanding that background and then playing matchmaker and setting up projects that the community themselves specify. So on that question of community partners for me can be anything from an individual resident who is interested in something. So the one guy who's like, yeah, we should be investing in solar, but how the heck do we do that in our community? Right, to a school system, right? It could be sort of anywhere in between. So this is from Greene County, which is again an adjoining county to where Indiana University's bubble is. And we had a significant number of students. One is too many, but we had 3 in a short period of time who took their own lives. And the students themselves asked for help in understanding how to approach issues of mental health with their peers. Parents tended to try to protect their kids, and school teachers were very nice about the fact that suicide had happened, but nobody was willing to actually say those words out loud and address it head on. So it actually came from the students themselves. In fact, unfortunately, one of the students who died, the newspaper chose to report that she had been found bound to a tree, which sounded incredibly strange because they did not want to publicize that the student had taken her life. So the students partnered with a undergraduate class within our School of Public Health that deals on lifespan development, and together they worked on a curriculum to talk about at age appropriate level issues of mental health for different ages of students in the community. And we worked closely with the extension coordinator, who was the youth education coordinator. And so what was really interesting about this is that 3 of the students in that particular cohort of high school students who were working on this project ended up being at Indiana University. And so we have then this ongoing relationship that's been built between the community and the university. And when we partner, my job is to partner with one community, one county at a time. And when we moved to the next county, they saw the work that we had done in Greene County with youth and mentorship, and they immediately said, we want that. We don't care what it looks like, but we want something like that in our community because our youth needs it. So that was a great opportunity. During COVID, our art museum suffered the fate of most art museums, which is your doors are closed and then no one can see your art. So they actually got a great grant between the Jordan Schnitzer Family Foundation, which is I think our local family foundation, and our Center for Rural Engagement. We had some grant money available. And they put together a lookbook, and a lookbook was like an MP3 player. You could play a recorded track. You could look at pictures of art. They gave them pencils and paper, and everything came in like a little box, like I had a wooden board in it, so then you could use that as something to lean your art on as you were drawing. And the idea was to be able to take the museum on the road and get it out to students. And we recognize with rural communities, it's really tough for students to really get access to arts and to humanities and you know, those kinds of experiences. And as university campus, like we have that in abundance. So the lookbook was something that we started out with, and then we were encouraging rural teachers to start look clubs, which when they were back in school, they can then access these resources. We keep the resources updated. And then where possible, we'll put kids on buses and bring them to campus. We've done that around opera. We have one of the leading opera programs in the country. So we've done like kids do opera kind of weekends where we'll bring students to campus, and they'll have like a session before the opera to really talk about what's going on. We have a mobile maker, which has all kinds of cool stuff in it, you know, like Cricut machines and 3D printers and what have you. We're set up with local school systems or libraries, which are like the unsung heroes of our rural communities, to be quite honest. And we'll do all kinds of maker events. And so, for example, here at the Melton Library in Orange County, they pulled up and they did pumpkin carving, but what they actually did was to do 3D printing and all kinds of different activities. And they made 200 new friends while doing that. So this is a very brief, fleeting introduction, but also a great way to get students to come out and to lead those activities with kids in the community. And then here's a great opportunity. Alex Tedrow was a graduate student in the School of Music. We've had a lot of interactions around music. We'll have our music students go out and partner with the orchestra and the band, and they'll sit side by side, a junior high school student with a junior student from the university who plays clarinet, and they'll sit side by side and they'll play their pieces together in orchestra. And then this guy is a composer, and he never heard anything symphonic until he was 13, and it changed his life. So what he does is he introduces students to things like film scores and says, okay, what are we hearing here? Why does this work? And they'll actually encourage them over a 3-day workshop to compose music. And doesn't matter what instrument they use to make that sound, but really exposing them to the ideas of music and creativity. And then we bring college students out to help them with the process.
Great, thank you for that, Jane. I'm going to turn it back over to Ashley. I'm going to get to the right slide. Slide 31. Ashley, if you could talk a little bit about opportunities, challenges, and how you go about addressing those, that would be great.
Yeah. So these are some of the challenges. Some of them are unique to Dartmouth, and some of them are not at all. So what the home and access to Wi-Fi is not at all unique. That is part of living in a rural place. It impacts our mentoring programs in a particular way because we have, forms that guardians and parents need to sign, and either those can be given in paper copy, analog, or most traditionally lately, they're digitized. And so when you have inconsistent, spotty, or simply not at all existent, Wi-Fi, then communication with parents and guardians, if the transportation is running late, or getting the form signed so that their, child can participate, is an extra hurdle that we have to kind of navigate around being in a rural place. Transportation, I mentioned, so everything's far-ish. And our course schedule and D plan. So the D plan is just a reference to Dartmouth is on a quarter system instead of a semester system. So every 8 to 10 weeks is a new quarter. And what the D plan is overlaid on top of that, it means that students are taking classes on campus and then away, pretty much alternating every single quarter. And so continuity of mentors is extremely hard. The only 2 years where there is continuity is their first year and their senior year. But for sophomores and juniors, who would be understandably the bulk of our mentoring programs, because seniors have a foot out the door and first years commit to a jillion things and then drop half of them once they realize that actually college is a lot. The sophomores and juniors are are the ones who are either there for 8 weeks and then gone. And so we have to be really thoughtful in when we are making our cohorts of mentors so that we have a really relevant distribution of ages. Transportation is also a beast because we have a fleet of cars. We have 6 vehicles that we maintain and that are ours at the center. A 12-passenger van, 2 vans, and 3 cars, which is great, and they are used constantly. However, Gen Z doesn't get their license as much as they used to. And so in the absence of having a driver's license, and Dartmouth's policy is that they need to have had it for at least a year, they need to have driven at least 1,500 miles, and then they need to go through kind of the modules to be safely driver certified. In the absence of having enough student drivers, our programs can't go out because we don't have people to drive them. And so that is also just a unique challenge that is partial to Dartmouth, but also not at all. It's simply related to being geographically in vast places across a large geographic range, being in a rural community.
Ashley, if you don't mind, fill up in the chat, put, it looks like a little snippet of, I think a research paper about rural areas benefiting from digital mentoring. And so I'm interested to hear how you incorporate virtual mentoring, if you do at all. And then additionally, how does that kind of come up against the sort of challenge of broadband access and internet access? Yeah,
so we've all had this thing called COVID, in which case we needed to transition a lot to digital. I think digital mentoring is an incredible tool. I think in-person mentoring is vastly more transformational from a Dartmouth student point of view. There's a human connection that is just not as palpable. Access is easier, but long-term sustainability and connection is not as much when it's digital, is what we have found. It also very much depends on the age. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds that no, zero interest in digital mentoring. Their parents might, but they do not. And high schoolers, we kept SEED, which works with our first-gen low-income high school scholars. SEED did not pause or stop in any way during COVID. All of our other school-based programs did, because either the teachers in the classroom said, we are barely keeping our head above water as is, transitioning 2nd grade to digital. We can't manage something else. Or in SIBS, the child and the parent said, this is not, they're on a screen constantly as is in this particular kind of mode of life. And we would really want something in person. So I think, to the point, there is a role for expanding access. I think we hold this great segue to this particular slide. We have multiple stakeholders. So if our primary stakeholder were only the mentees, we might do more digital mentoring, but that's not true for us because we are a part of Dartmouth College, and another primary stakeholder for us is the Dartmouth students, and their learning and engagement and consistency is vastly improved with in-person. And so those are kind of 2 things that we just need to hold together. And then DCSI, that's our center expertise. When we're looking at what do we have to offer, what do we have to learn, and who are the people we can bring to the table. I want to take the last hot second that we have to just talk about the process, because that was a question earlier. So it's intensive. So this is what we do pretty much for every single mentoring program, is these, pretend I can count 3, 6, 9, 12 steps. There's an application, there's an interview after the application, then we're verifying college standing and selecting the mentors. Once they are selected, again, we're looking at driving ability, we're looking at ages, we're looking at interest areas, we're looking at how they interviewed and applied. They take a best practices in youth mentoring training. And then they also, which is about an hour, 90 minutes, they also take a program specific training, which is about 2 hours. So they take the best practices in mentoring, everybody gets that. And then they have, if they're a SIB, they have a 2-hour SIBS training, or they have a 2-hour growing change training, or they have a 2-hour America Reads training. They also, because we're working with minors, they sign a code of conduct. We are in a mandated reporting state of New Hampshire, so we talk through all of that and look through the protection of minors, what does and doesn't work, what is and is not acceptable. And often we have to give some examples in this kind of day and age too, right? They sign that they will not text or call a minor or email them directly. And so we have to give some examples of how that might be very well-meaning and how that is potentially unsafe for them and for the young person. And so we spend a lot of time on that. That's a separate training. If they're driving or they're able to be driver certified, they go through a module through the Dartmouth College, safe driving. Then they have to be trained in our cars. Where are our cars located? How do you start an electric car? How do you drive a 12-passenger van safely? Where the heck is the gas tank for that van? And then there's the background checks and fingerprinting for every single district, parent guardian consent sign-offs, and check-ins with community partners. And for SIBs, the community partner is also a part of the interview process, right? They know their kids best, and they know who is going to be a really good match for that kid in a one-on-one mentoring that isn't cohort. So this is very in-depth, and kind of in each of those, we cover some of the questions that were raised earlier as far as language and as far as, DEI, and what does it look like to be of the community, but not of the community. And how do you kind of navigate that? So we have space for those conversations. We also have weekly meetings and one-on-one time every single week for every program. So they are not like trained and then good luck. There is kind of ongoing check-ins as well as with the community partners. How's it going in the classroom? Are students showing up on time? What could we be doing better? And then ongoing conversations with parents and guardians. So yeah, I'll stop there because we're over time, I believe.
Jake is giving us some time from his closing. He'll keep the closing a little bit shorter. So we still have, I think, probably 5 to 7 minutes. Okay. To answer some of these other questions. Great. These will be for either one of you. The first is, it seems like in both of your universities and both of the work that you do, community partners are incredibly important, maybe in different, maybe in similar ways. But what are some suggestions or maybe stories about what good partnership looks like with community organizations, with nonprofits, with schools? Because the competing priorities is always something that seems to come up. So maybe just a little bit about community partnerships, how to develop those, how to develop good relationships.
Yeah, I have a very strict rule about this. Obviously working with faculty, very well-meaning, working with students, again, very well-meaning, but sometimes they put the cart before the horse. And I cannot stress enough the power of building relationships and the need to take time to make that commitment towards building a relationship. It cannot be in name only. You have to show up. You have to be a recognizable part of that community. And when I say part of that community, it's a part by extension, right? Somebody has extended their network to you to introduce you into the community. And then you have to live up to that, right? You have to be consistent. You have to show up when you say you're going to show up. You deliver what you say you're going to deliver over and over again. And for me, Lee Arnstein's model of participation is the thing that guides me. I want to go into a community at nothing less than a partnership level. I don't want to go into a partnership and just sort of have like lip service about how we're going to work together and then me do all the work and just sort of like, haha, here it is done. I mean, this is truly a collaboration and a co-partnership. So that's become incredibly important to us. We all have apocryphal stories of a well-meaning faculty member going and doing something and souring a relationship, which has taken years to build and will take years to rebuild. And so, it really does behoove us to get out there and to also offer our students and our faculty some best practices. And I think, Ashley, your chart for how you onboard students, I mean, it's tremendous. And when we do some measure of the same kind of thing, Our students are typically not engaging one-on-one with students, which, you know, gives them a little bit more distance. But still, you know, having some kind of practice in place where you can mediate and any kind of harm that could be caused, I think is really important.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think pieces that are related to the relationship piece is listening first, you know, asking and listening first. I think that we have taken a different stance, partly because of where we're located and just partly for other kind of mission-driven reasons. And we do two things that are slightly different, as I've come to learn are slightly different. So one, for like immersion trips, we are never going to do something where it is simply bodies in a building. We're never going to do a trip where students are painting, because local labor who are painters can actually be paid to paint. And so we are taking away from the local economy if we were just saying, we're just going to bring people there. So I think some of the listening and collaboration is, what are the unique skills that are being offered? In our case, and for any college and university, there's an energy piece. You know, 18 to 21-year-olds have a lot of energy and big ideas and out of the box thinking, and that's really valuable. So where can we capitalize on that instead of saying, like, we're just going to put people somewhere and hope that they can do something that's physical and active and doesn't require a lot of training. I think the other piece is that we are asked constantly to do a day of service, and that is very popular. It is not popular with our community partners, and we have said we will no longer do that, because locally, community partners, it is so much effort for the community organizations to prepare for an influx of students when, for example, they won't show. A quarter of them, a third. They just won't, because it will be hard. Transportation is hard. There are studies, you know, because of a quarter system, it's midterms here, basically from week 4 to week 8. And so it is such a huge lift of the community partner without a whole lot of gain for them. And yet every year we are asked, let's do a day of service. That is not what our community needs. That is not, they have said, this is actually not helpful. Please don't. Please go deep and not wide. Let's get some consistency and get 10 people instead of getting 100 people who are going to be here for 35 minutes or one day. So that's another piece of kind of the relationship building is listening, and then being able to use the platform of your college or university to say, we've listened, we've heard you, and your wisdom is equal to ours. We will do what you have said is most helpful.
That is a really interesting point, Ashley, that I had not ever considered before. I also think service days or volunteer opportunities are often tied into mentoring. But like from a time perspective, as a person that's been in the community partner role, I would much prefer to focus my time and energy on the direct mission of mentoring, and every other event or thing that you have to do drifts far away from that. I've never considered the local economy though. So that's a really interesting point. Kind of moving on, Terry asked a question about outcome data. And so maybe just talk for a few minutes about how you evaluate your programs, how you evaluate your initiatives. And then Jane and Ashley, we do actually still have 5 more minutes.
Yeah, I was going to have to talk really, really fast. So I think, you know, in terms of outcome data, I think one of the challenges is everybody who works in community work, community engaged work, understands it is really hard to measure outcomes, right? You want to measure your outcomes at the end of one session. You want to measure the outcomes at the end of 1 week or 1 year. We're pushed on our campus to give sort of return on investment kind of data, but I always resist giving it in the kind of terms that folks want to hear it. I'm very much a believer in the power of networks. And so what I look at is, Who do we now have working together within a community who wasn't working together previously? How have we generated, created excitement, gotten people to be motivated to show up for things that there's never been an opportunity in the past? So for example, we'll run health fairs within communities that are completely staffed by IU students, faculty, and staff. And so this is students getting interprofessional practice education. It's community members getting audiology exams that they haven't been able to schedule because there's no doctor locally who can give them a hearing test. What's the outcome of that? That somebody got a hearing test, or that we started talking about the fact that there are opportunities for us to come together to provide information, right? I think that the difficulty with outcomes is who are you talking about? And this is back to Ashley's wonderful slide with the balance, right? My program does a lot of engaged learning, and we're not a service learning program because frankly, students are going to learn stuff and they're going to grow and develop. And I'm not really as concerned with that as I am about what are the outputs and the outcomes for the community. I'd much rather focus my time on making sure that we're making the community whole, better, making them into helping them become the kind of community that they want to be. And students are going to get something out of the process along the way, right? So if I'm looking at Ashley's balance slide, I've got my thumb tipped on the side of the community. I'm much more externally focused than I am internally focused towards the university. And then that skews for me what I want to do with outputs and how I want to measure things.
I think our outputs and outcomes are related to student learning, as well as our kind of consistency with partners, right? So how many partners so for example, we're in a small area, but we have probably about 75 to 80 community partners in the Upper Valley, right? So that's a big number. So how many of those year after year come back? How many of those, this goes to the relationship building. If you've built a relationship that is honest, and this is primarily my job, they believe me when I say, please be candid. Like this is a learning opportunity for our students. Did this not go well? Hopefully I'm not knowing that at the end of the engagement, like they've told me in week 2. But they can say, ooh, kind of missed the mark. In which case we can go, okay, thank you. Tell me more. What was that? Oh, a student came to do kindergarten America Reads and basically was wearing a bra and only a bra. Cool. We're gonna go over dress code again. That's helpful, and totally understand why the parent who walked by was uncomfortable. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. So I think that's not an outcome, but that is a corollary of how well are we building relationships in act and not just in name. And then we have student learning outcomes, right? Are students learning more about a social issue? Are they learning more about what is the praxis between what they're learning in the classroom and what that looks like in real life? Are they understanding that being first gen in Roxbury is really different than being first gen in White River Junction, Vermont? And being low income in those two different places looks and feels really different. Are they understanding where they can get more information? Are they getting deeper about what that could look like? When we give out senior cords to seniors who graduate, it is not to every student who has engaged with our center. It is to students who have made DCSI, the Dartmouth Center for Social Impact, their home at Dartmouth. They have mentored, but then they were like, cool, now I want to do an internship in San Francisco looking at safe needle disposals and how that impacts public health. And then I also want to do the immersion trip on the Texas-Mexico border and drive along it for 10 days. And then I want to come back and I want to take a class that has a social impact practicum in it, which is similar to what Jane was talking about. Like those are the students that we give senior cords to because their depth of impact is meaningful. Their impact in the community is meaningful, and the impact we have had on their learning is meaningful. And so that is how we kind of measure our success and longevity.
Thank you. And with that, we are just going to start finishing up here. Jane and Ashley, thank you so much for putting the time into this and for giving your perspective, your experience. Super helpful. And so with that, I have included information to reach out to Jane and Ashley, if you so choose. But with that, just thank everyone for attending, and I'll turn it back over to Jake.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. Yeah, I wanted to give as much time as possible to this conversation. I thought it was so great and so many really amazing concrete examples. So we'll speed through this really quickly. Again, these slides will be sent out afterwards, but we do have some additional resources available. So if you're located in an area with an affiliate, you can go to that link to contact your local affiliate for any further training resources or help with public awareness and advocacy. We have the mentoring connector available for anybody. So you can use this to recruit mentors by submitting your program, and you can get some assistance on recruiting mentors. And then finally, we have the National Mentoring Resource Center, which is funded by OJJDP, and you can access no-cost training and technical assistance. Remember, again, this will be sent out, I believe, a week from now, this recording and the slides, and it'll also be posted on the website. So if you do want to revisit any of the slides or contact information, you can see it there. Definitely stay connected with us. You can see a couple ways to do that. Email us at collaborativewebinarseries@mentoring.org. Use the hashtag mentoring webinar, or again, you can visit our webpage on the Mentor website. And so this actually does not have anything on it yet, but we do have a webinar next month. And so we'll send out information on that again, but it'll be on March 16th, and it'll be a youth town hall, which is really exciting. We'll get to hear from 4 amazing youth voices on mentoring to support our mental wellness and well-being. And so learning a little bit more about current stats and information on youth mental health. Thank you all so much for joining. Again, thank you to our amazing panelists, and we'll see you all next time. Oh, sorry, the time for that panel is 1 p.m. to 2:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And again, that'll be sent out. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Take care.